Hello, everybody, let's talk today about the US China rocky divorce. Despite the fact that they met last week, it is clear, I think, that there will be a rocky divorce sooner or later, and I'll explain a bit later why. We're also going to talk about the Russia China relations because they are getting closer now, these two countries, with each other. And thirdly, we will look also at the Dutch Chinese Nexperia saga, which goes on and where China is now really angry at the Netherlands for what is happening. So let's go back first to the China-US situation, where last week President Xi Jinping, President Trump met each other in the evening of the APEC meeting in South Korea and agreed that they would call the trade war that both countries have with each other, they would call a truce for 1 year. There's no agreement, but a truce. And the US backed down a lot in the tariffs they put on China. And China basically put down the big trump card in their pocket and said, okay, we have these export controls over the rare earth metals, but we now put this on hold for a while. Some of the metals could be exported again to the United States and Europe. So obviously that gives a kind of relief to the global markets. But what's really actually interesting, of course, is that, obviously over the next months, the teams from both sides have to come together and work out the details of all these issues. Remember, nothing has been signed. A lot of details have to be agreed on. And it is my guess, I'm 100% almost sure of that, a lot of issues will arise from that, which you can see right now, because what the White House says right now and what China says right now from regarding the same meeting are two different versions. Seemingly both sides cannot agree on actually what has been agreed during the meeting, which of course is not very healthy and is not a good basis to start to negotiate further about the details. Now, obviously, this is a kind of a common pattern with Trump. This happened with Russia and the United States also. They do agree on certain things. And then all of a sudden Trump backs down, either on purpose, either he forgot, we're not sure. It may might be a strategy. But in Trump does this quite a lot. Say this thing and actually do the other thing. And of course that doesn't work with China. So, and on top of that, of course, is that Scott Bessent, the American Secretary of the Treasury, only yesterday, he said in an interview on TV that, they give the US, that they give themselves 1 year time to develop capabilities, production capabilities in the rare earth metals industry. And of course, that was a clear indication towards China that they would try to get on top again on China in exactly the field where the Chinese have a chokehold, which is, of course, the rare earth metals. Now, obviously, as discussed in another video of mine last week, China has a years and maybe decades long advantage, an advance over the US in the rare earth metals, because they have all the know-how and technology to refine them and produce them, which is the difficult part, and the US does not have that. So the idea that the United States within 1 year will become a fast follower or even surpass China in the rare earth metals business is just a plain fantasy. This is never going to happen. As discussed, it takes hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. It takes almost a completely rewiring and a reorganizing of a whole industrial sector, and it needs to mobilize, and the US needs to mobilize many, many resources to get this done. So it's not going to happen in 1 year, far from it. Basically, also Japan tried to get into the rare earth metals game about 15 years ago, and they didn't succeed very well. They have made progress, but not very well, and they tried it 50 years ago already. So, for China, it's also a very clear sign that, the US is still there to get the better of them. They don't want a real agreement. They still want to contain China economically, technologically, and so forth. And of course, now in the rare earth metals business, because that is the real trump card which China has over the United States. Of course, US has now clearly indicated that they want to go back on top on China. Now, if you talk to any Chinese, and of course I've been in China a long time, it is for the Chinese already since years obvious that the US is there to contain China. If you talk to any Chinese, they say this openly. So this is nothing new for China, but obviously it's rather remarkable that Scott Bessent says this so openly right now. That, of course, will lead me to the conclusion that this will be a rocky divorce. I mean, over the next months, they need to discuss the details of certain agreements. This is not going to happen. Probably the United States will come up with new ideas, with new tariffs, with other things to block China. And then, of course, then the whole problem becomes more increasingly difficult. And this will end up eventually in a very rocky divorce in every sector, possibly economically, technologically, and so forth. And I think both sides really know this now, and that I think where the world has to prepare for, basically. Now, of course, on the other hand, you have then Russia and China, which over the last 2 days also met. The Russian delegation in China was welcomed by Xi Jinping in Beijing, and rolled out the red carpet for the Russians, basically. And it was very often that there was a much more hearty and friendly relationship there. And Russia and China is obviously getting more and more close together. Xi Jinping basically said in the communique from the government that the China-Russia relations are forging ahead, basically, despite the turbulent external environment. And Xi Jinping also made the pledge to expand investment and economic relations with Russia. He met with the Russian Prime Minister in Beijing, and specifically talked about closer cooperation in energy. That means we're still going to continue to buy oil from Russia, and probably even more. Remember, there's a land pipeline between Russia and China for oil. We're going to continue to work close on agriculture. That means Russia, of course, can sell more of its agricultural products, and a lot of soybeans, by the way, to China also, in aerospace, the digital economy, and green development. So obviously, China and Russia are going to more integrate both economies, one can say, and that's a clear sign that China is moving close to Russia and moving across further away from the United States, and that just happened basically on the same last few 2 to 3 days, which is a very clear sign that the U.S., if it's true that they tried to break up China and Russia. Remember that the US had this idea, they want to peel away China from Russia. Now, of course, the result of all this and the unreliable behavior of the United States, of course, is that China and Russia are getting closer together, and China gets further away from the United States. So that is a clear result of the last few days. Moreover, Russia recently has tested a new rocket with the name of the Burevestnik, which is a brand new rocket, basically, because it is nuclear powered. It has a small nuclear reactor, apparently, and it flew 14 in a test flight. It flew 14,000 kilometers and stayed in the air for 15 hours, basically. And as we understand, it could stay actually in the air for days. And of course, China would be quite interesting, I believe, to have also to be able to, that the Russians could share this technology with them. So obviously, Russia and China have certain things to discuss and have many things where they could cooperate with each other. And this, of course, means it's bad news for the United States. nothing less than that. And I think we all should be very well prepared for the fact that Russia and China will work closer together, and the US and Europe will have to deal with that. And then we have the Dutch-China problem over Nexperia. So remember, a few weeks ago, the Dutch government all of a sudden took control over Nexperia, which is a Chinese company in the Netherlands with production facilities in the Netherlands and in China. And the Dutch used a very old law from 1952, which has never been used before, to take control over this company because of certain, as they claim, national security interests. And it was been speculated that the Dutch took over the company because of they thought that some know-how was going back to China, or that the Chinese were preparing to move production back to China, or there were other reasons. But at the end of the day, we're talking about not the high-end chips. Nexperia doesn't produce high-end chips, but more mid-end chips. So there's not really know-how transfer, in my opinion. But now it came out yesterday that the Dutch put in a statement. They said that the Netherlands actually took control over the company because they say Nexperia want to use certain funds to save the chip factory in China from bankruptcy. So basically, they said, okay, the Chinese CEO in the Netherlands, Zhang Xuezheng, basically said, okay, he wanted to use the money from the Netherlands to save the company in China, and the Dutch could not allow this, basically. And there is no question at all about nationalization, as the Chinese would claim. This is just a matter of not unlawful behavior from the Chinese, basically. Now, of course, China is very angry about this. They say that the Dutch are acting unilaterally and they're not being cooperative in the negotiations which are going on right now between the Chinese and the Dutch government to solve this problem. So the Chinese say this is completely unlawful and it's a violation of the interest of Chinese companies in Europe. Now, of course, the problem of this is that the problem has not been solved right now, but there are plenty of companies now in Europe, especially in the automotive business, who have now a lack of the chips from Nexperia and are running low on their stocks. And at the moment, some chips are being sold for 5 to 10 times the price, because basically there is now chaos in the global chip production chain. And that, of course, causes a lot of trouble to European companies. And the Chinese have actually has put an export ban on the chips from China, who are produced from Nexperia in China, leaving China and being sent to Europe. That export ban is still in place. And China says, okay, we assess case by case whether car manufacturers in Europe may purchase these chips. And of course, in this way, China can choose to give American car factories priority over certain European competitors. And of course, in this way, they can put more pressure on the European Union. So there's a ban, but they say, okay, we choose which companies can buy these Nexperia chips made in China and who cannot. And that, of course, is a way to put pressure on the European Union. So yes, we'll see how this gets solved. It wouldn't be very easy, but of course, it's very interesting to see that. Imagine it would be the opposite case. It would be, imagine that there would be a Dutch company in China with a certain production facilities, and all of a sudden the Chinese government would, for any given reason, take control over the Dutch company. That, of course, would be a huge problem in Europe. The press would be all over the place. They would be up in arms. They would probably accuse China of all kinds of valuations and threaten the rights of Western companies in China, and so forth and so forth. So, I mean, this is quite an interesting story that, the Dutch have a certain perspective. They say, no, this is not nationalization. But I'm sure if this would happen in China and the Chinese government would take control of a foreign company, but by the way, never ever happened before. So this is rather unique. Of course, the Western press would obviously say that this is nationalization, we can't trust China, and so forth and so forth. Anyway, let's see how this story continues in the next few days. This is it for now. I thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, please don't forget to click the like button and to subscribe to the channel, and we see each other very soon. Bye bye.